We are convening a regular meeting of the Hollister City Council. Meeting is now called to order. It is 6:30 p.m. Councilmember Morales, can you lead us in the pledge? City Attorney, do we have any reportable action from closed session?
No, there's nothing to report.
Okay. Before we begin, I just want to read something about decorum in our meetings. I need to address the manner and decorum of our meetings and issue a warning in this regard. Meetings must be in an orderly and efficient manner without willful disruption so that the business of the city can be conducted. While the council is more than willing to listen to comments from the public, this must be done at the appropriate time and should be done up at the podium with the microphone so your words can be heard and properly recorded. There cannot be interruptions when council members are speaking or audience members calling names, chanting, or yelling out. If you do so, a warning will be issued to you, and if the behavior continues, you may be asked to leave the chambers. If we have too much disruption from the audience, depending on severity, it may be necessary to call a recess, clear chambers, or cancel a meeting. I would like to ask for your courtesy and cooperation in this regard, so it won't be necessary to take any of these actions. All right, for public input, prior to taking public comment, I need to announce that agenda item C1 regarding options for a crosswalk for Memorial Drive will not be discussed at tonight's meeting. It was an error on the agenda, and the item was already heard on February 5th. It was just inadvertently included, so I apologize for confusion. All right, this is the time for anyone in the audience to speak on any item not on the agenda and within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speaker cards are available in the lobby and are to be completed and given to the city clerk before speaking. When the city clerk calls your name, please come to the podium, state your name and city for the record, and speak to the city council. If you're joining us via Zoom, please click on the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. If you're joining us via Zoom using a cell phone, please press *9.
Madam Mayor, are we not doing proclamations before we take public comment?
It's right after public input on the script, that's why.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, where was I? Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes with a maximum of 30 minutes per subject. Please note, state law prohibits the city council from discussing or taking action on items that are not on the agenda. City clerk, do we have public comment?
We do not have any public comment for items not on the agenda.
Okay. Then we're going to move on. We have special orders of the day. We have a couple of proclamations. We're going to start with Victoria Montoya for the San Benito Health Foundation. If you want to come down. Okay. Yeah, make sure I give you the right one here. There we are. So this is for you. All right, I'm going to read the proclamation. So this is for San Benito Health Foundation. It's the whereas Give Kids a Smile was created by the American Dental Association as an initiative to give free dental care to children of underserved populations. And whereas the San Benito Health Foundation is a proud partner and is committed to improving health and dental services for our community's underserved population. And whereas on Friday, February 23rd, from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., the San Benito Health Foundation will be hosting its annual Give Kids a Smile, where Dental Director Dr. Edwin Acosta, along with Dr. Fahim Nimhor and staff, will provide free dental screenings and fluoride treatment for children and teens under 17 years old. Now, therefore, I, Mia Casey, Mayor of Hollister, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby thank the San Benito Health Foundation for their ongoing efforts and commitment to the City of Hollister and the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to encourage anyone who is interested to visit our clinic. Feel free anytime, and especially on that day. Well, thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's got one more proclamation for Black History Month. And Janessa, I think you were going to come up, although you're all welcome to come up if you'd like. So I'm going to give you this. So first, I just want to recognize there's a group that's actually put several events together, and I wanted to recognize Janine Riddle, Anita Saurenhaus, Pamela Brown, Jenna Rice, Denise Black, Star Bracamonte Law, and Janessa Law for all of their efforts, and I want to read the proclamation to you. Whereas the City of Hollister takes pride in recognizing February 2024 as Black History Month to honor the actions, words, and achievements of Black Americans who have contributed to the success and prosperity of the United States, and whereas through literature, music, architecture, dance, film, and every conceivable medium in between, Black artists and intellectuals have used their talents to honor their heritage, educate and inspire, and open minds and hearts. And whereas Black History Month commemorates, celebrates, and thanks Black Americans for their innumerable achievements and contributions in academic pursuits, business, fine arts, political action, science, and more. Now, therefore, I, Mia Casey, Mayor of Hollister, do hereby proclaim February 2024 to be Black History Month, and during this month, urge us to draw inspiration from this legacy as we continue together on the path toward equality, liberty, and opportunity for all. Would you like to say a few words? You sure? Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, lost track. All right, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. Do any members of council have any brief questions or comments on items from the consent agenda?
If I can, pull item A7, please.
7, anything? Councilmember Morales, anything? And I'd like to pull item 10. All right, if I could get a motion to adopt the consent agenda with the exceptions of items 7 and 10.
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mayor Casey, I do want to state for the record that there are no public comments for any of the consent agenda items.
Oh, sorry about that. All right. So let's move to item 7, ordinance number 1246, an ordinance of the City of Hollister amending City of Hollister Municipal Code Section 2.08.090, removal of office of Chapter 2.08, City Manager, of Title II, Administration and Personnel.
Are we going to get a report on the item, or?
Yeah, the purpose of this ordinance amendment is to change the number of votes required to remove the city manager from his position, right, without cause. So for cause would still require a 3/5 vote of the city council, but without cause would require 4/5 vote. And that change is in alignment with the city manager's current contract.
Thank you. So First, I want to go on the record by stating that City Manager David Marioni is the best city manager that we've had, that I've ever had the pleasure of working with since my time here. I just want to state that publicly. I am the senior most city council member here, and the staff that we have now, because of Mr. Marioni, is superb and the best staff that I've ever had the chance to work with. So I want to get on the record and state that. However, when it comes to this item, and I've discussed this with my colleagues, I've discussed it with David Marioni, I have not stated it publicly, I think it sets a bad precedent for any city manager that is coming to our city and getting a 4/5 vote rather than what's traditionally been a 3/5 vote here. So I cannot support this moving forward. And because of that, I don't know if now is the most appropriate time to speak about it, or we can talk about it later. Because it doesn't really match up with his contract, city attorney.
I can look at that and make sure that, so you're saying that what the ordinance is proposing does not align with his current contract?
No, because I can't support it, then it's not going to align with his contract.
Right, and so because he has a contract that will take precedent over the ordinance.
He's protected.
Right, and
Got
so it's just any future city manager that would be subject to that.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Councilmember Morales, do you have any comments on that?
No, the contract should align with what we have, so I'm in support.
And I'd like to just add that I'm also in support. We're not talking about an instance where there's a cause. We're talking about for no reason if the council should decide to do away with our city manager. I'm sorry, that's a terrible way to put it, but for no reason, I think there should be a 4/5 vote. It shouldn't just be, 3 people get to decide for no reason. So I fully support this. So are we able to take a vote on this? Is this one that we have to have a 3?
You should take a vote. It does require 3 votes, affirmative votes to pass.
And if we don't have 3 votes, then what happens next? Because
It dies.
it dies, but the contract still stands.
Right.
Okay. All right, then can I get a motion on this item for approval?
I make a motion to approve.
And I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm
All
a no.
opposed?
No.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I believe we need to take public comment on the item as well. I'm sorry.
There are no public comments for this item or any of the other consent agenda items.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on then to item 10, resolution number 2024-11, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Hollister approving the subdivision improvement agreement for Project Almond and authorizing execution of the agreement for the improvements with Duke Realty Hollister Limited Partnership. I asked to pull this. It's not a question regarding the subdivision itself, but it relates to the project. And I just have a question I'd like to ask our city attorney. I am very supportive of economic development, but this project has concerned me since its inception, and there is a huge traffic impact that I'm not sure has been addressed. And so my question for you is, in looking back at the Planning Commission meetings, they had created some kind of a timeline for when they could have their 200 trucks on the road every day. And I guess my question for you is, they created a timeline, but they have no way of enforcing it, according to the director at the time, unless people complain. Do we have any standing? Is that something you could look at? And is there anything else we can do to prevent gridlock?
I mean, I'm not familiar enough with that to speak to it.
Okay, so we could possibly bring it back to talk about at some point? Is that how, should I just bring it up later and ask for it to be brought back? Is that the best way?
Yeah, and I can have Ms. Kelly, our in our planning department, provide a little bit of
Sure.
information as well.
That would be great.
Yes, good evening. Eva Kelly, Planning Manager, Acting Director, Development Services Department. I don't have any specific details for you, just off the cuff of my sleeve here, but there was an EIR adopted for the overall Clearest Park subdivision, and then there was an amendment in 2018, mostly related to traffic, and then there was another amendment for the Project Almond project itself, and all 3 of those documents have mitigation measures. And what we do is a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan for the development of the project. Mm-hmm. So they'll have to comply with those mitigation measures as well as any conditions of approval.
So you're saying there was an update then?
Yes.
For
there was
specifically for this project, because at the time I watched that Planning Commission for the conditional use permit, they said there wasn't one, and there was
an addendum for the.
So it was
yes.
added on. So we do have something.
Yes.
So it's addressed the
mm-hmm.
the
yeah, in 2020 or 2021, I can't recall the exact year. I think it was a 2020 addendum to the EIR for the project, which was approved early in 2021, is I believe the dates. That 2020 addendum addressed the Project Almond specific traffic impacts as it related to the previous addendum as well as the 2000 EIR, and had a specific traffic analysis for the project.
So what was the agreement with them as far as not having trucks on the road during rush hour traffic?
I would have to look at the exact details
something
of
we can
that.
talk about later. Okay.
But yeah.
All right. I have no other questions. Do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. So I'm confused. This is talking about the improvement agreement. So the concerns that the mayor is bringing up, does that have to do with this? Those improvement agreements, does that have to do with this item?
We can probably tag team it, but go ahead on the specifics of the subdivision.
So the subdivision improvement agreement is to satisfy the conditions of the project, because it is an approved conditioned project. So the subdivision improvement agreement is to certify and make sure that the improvements that that project was conditioned to are constructed. So
And the concern that she brought up specifically about the trucks and the traffic, is that part of this item that we're talking about mitigated, if it was mitigated or not?
not necessarily.
Okay, that's what I thought. Number two, what's the tax revenue that, just on average, the tax revenue that we're going to generate from having another Amazon here to our city every single year?
So that's a tough one to answer.
Just a rough estimate.
I mean, it depends on what products they have in. Right now, it was the last update we had received publicly was that it was for a large items, and so depending on full build out, I mean, you could definitely see six figures in tax revenue. Possibility of seven. Until they are in there and have a model that they have adopted,
millions, potentially millions of dollars in tax revenue.
There's potentially an information that you'd make a decision upon, which I would caution until we're seeing it. I wouldn't put a number on it because they have, if you think about space, if they're selling, a boat that is $1,000, the sales tax on a boat versus the physical space of hard drives could be considerably different. So it depends on what the products are and all of that, where it's being shipped to. So I hate to give you a wishy-washy answer, but to give you a number at this point would be. Yeah.
And what do we do with that tax revenue?
So that tax revenue would go into the general fund.
Fix the roads, staff our police, our fire, make sure our city's nice and safe, parks, all that type
all
of
of that
stuff?
is general fund.
Okay.
With the roads, we do have a series of other funds,
Yeah.
but at times general fund is used as
Okay.
well.
I just wanted to make sure. So yeah, this is critical that we get this approved. It sounds like the concerns that the mayor brought up were addressed potentially, but she's right. She never did support this item. But we need to bring more businesses here, generate more revenue so that we can maintain our infrastructure and make sure that our citizens have a higher quality of life than they have had from just building more houses here. So I 100% support this. Looking forward to hearing from the public. Thank you.
Councilmember Morales, do you have any comments?
On any specific deadlines for this project, if we want to have it brought back with additional information so that we can actually review the mitigation efforts as talked about in 2018, 2020, or 2021, just so that we have that information?
So I can certainly provide the city manager with the adopted and certified EAR and the addendums for distribution to the council. Those are adopted documents and the entitlements are approved with the conditions, and the mitigation measures all have their timing and their various conditions. So those are in place and the project is entitled. They're under construction now. So provided that their entitlements don't, or they don't pause construction and lose their building permit, they're entitled and fully able to complete the project. What's on the agenda tonight, as Socorro mentioned, is the subdivision improvement agreement. So this is their agreement with the city for all of the city infrastructure as well as the offsite infrastructure. So this includes them bonding for making sure that the roads that they've agreed to install, the sidewalks they've agreed to install, the roundabout that will be going in on San Felipe, all of those things, they'll bond for it and they are agreeing to construct them. Otherwise, the city will construct them on their behalf. As far as the on-site improvements, the construction of the building, that's approved, underway, and it's already done. So the timing, as far as conditions, any mitigation measures, those are still in place. The vast majority are completed because they're at that stage in the project, but there are conditions such as paying impact fees and those types of things that are done at final occupancy. So there's still that step in the building permit process. And then those entitlements do run with the land. So you have your code enforcement efforts as far as if there's non-compliance with any other sections of the code or your conditions of approval in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for getting that information. If there is some kind of a traffic schedule, whatever you have, just if you can have the city manager forward it to us, that'd be great. Thank you. So can I get a motion then to approve this item?
Make a motion to approve.
Can I get a second? All right. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Motion carries 3-0. Moving on. So we're going to move on to public hearing. We have item 1, resolution number 2024-18, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Hollister denying appeal 2023-2 and upholding the Planning Commission denial of a conditional use permit 2023-3 to install a CNG fueling facility for exclusive use by Star Concrete vehicles operating on the adjacent Star Batch plant and material supply facility, San Benito Rockery, located at 151 Hillcrest Road, located north of Gibbs Road, within the M1 Light Industrial Zoning District. Can we have a staff report?
Hi, good evening. Magda Gonzalez, Contract Senior Planner. I have been informed that appellant wasn't able to attend today and is requesting a continuance. Since we did notice this item, I will defer to the city attorney as to what we should do next.
If the city council chooses to continue the item, we would suggest that you do so to a date certain, because the item has already been publicly noticed, and that way it wouldn't have to be publicly noticed again.
Yes, Councilmember.
Thank you. Question: do they have to be here for us to hear the item and to make a decision on it tonight?
They don't have to be here, but typically with a public hearing that relates to a particular party's property rights, it is a good idea to have them available to make comment if they wish. So, because a public hearing is for all parties to present their sides.
Which was publicly noticed, but they chose not to come.
I'm not sure why they didn't attend.
Yeah, do we know why they're not here?
We do not know.
Okay, I'm definitely in support of the bill. That's why.
Yeah.
Again, I just said I want to support commerce and business and help businesses grow here. So I'm definitely in support of it. I'm willing to move forward without them being here, in support of it, and after hearing the public comment. Thanks.
Councilmember Morales, what's your thoughts about continuing?
I'm in favor. If the applicant is the one requesting for it to be moved, then I would respect the applicant's request, and I would say then date certain would be our next available date, or in consultation with the applicant.
I'm inclined to agree with Councilmember Morales. City Manager, when do you think this could be brought back?
Well, I'd have to chat with the clerk. We're going to have to rerun the notice in the paper. Will we have to?
Not if we announce tonight to a
Okay.
date certain. So if we can pick that date right now, then you wouldn't have to.
I mean, as far as the work, it's done. So, I mean, if we don't need to do that, we could just scoot it to the next meeting.
Okay. When is our next meeting? What would
The
that
March
date
4th.
be? March 4th.
March 4th.
So what is the will of the council then? I think we've got two willing to continue it. So is that
And that's sufficient. for
sufficient?
this item.
Okay, so we're going to continue the item then, so that the owner can be here.
Do we need to take public comment on it?
Do we have any public comment on this?
We don't, but we're not doing the public hearing right now, so it's
So we
just being
don't take
continued
comment
to
on it.
March 4th.
Okay.
Do we need to take a formal vote on it?
It's not required.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to move on to item 2, resolution number 2024-19, a resolution of the City Council of City of Hollister authorizing city manager to act as the certifying officer in order to certify the finding of no significant impact, sign any other related documents, and transmit the FONSI to the Department of Housing and Urban Development pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act for the Eden Housing Mimosa Street Investors Affordable Residential Development located on Lot 100 in the West Fairview Specific Plan area. May I have a staff report?
Good evening. I'm going to try to be very brief. This is for the Eden Housing Project located in West of Fairview, shown on the light blue rectangle on your screen. The project has been approved. The Planning Commission approved a site and architectural review for the construction of a 100-unit multifamily affordable project within West of Fairview. It's to be restricted to affordable incomes for families and farm workers for a period of 55 years. After the project was approved, the applicant applied for project-based Section 8 vouchers for the development for HUD, and HUD requires that we prepare environmental review under NEPA to review the project in order to release those funds. So as required, an environmental assessment was prepared, and based on what the environmental assessment determined, staff determined that a finding of no significant impact was appropriate for the project. NEPA requires adequate noticing of the FONSI, but doesn't get into specifics. So staff followed our normal review requirements for CEQA. We received 2 comments on the FONSI. Both were unrelated to the FONSI. One was from the school district, and they reiterated their request that the city continue to inform them of projects, and the other was from an individual that didn't want affordable housing in the area.
Erica, just to clarify, it was a high school district.
Sorry, high school district. So in conclusion, staff is recommending that you adopt the resolution and have the city manager sign the FONSI as the certifying officer. We will then continue the rest of the process so that the funds can be issued by HUD for the project.
Okay.
That concludes my presentation. If you have any, answer any questions you have.
Awesome. Do we have any questions from council? Any questions? All right, then I'm going to open the public hearing on this item. City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Yes, we have Speaker Ouija Song.
Hi, good evening, Honourable Mayor and City Council members of the City of Hollister. Thank you for taking the time to see this item today, and I want to say a big thank you to Erica for all the hours she's dedicated to working with us to bringing more affordable housing to the City of Hollister. So my name is Weijia Song. I'm here on behalf of Eden Housing. Eden Housing is a non-profit affordable housing developer that's been operating in California for close to 60 years. We currently serve over 22,000 low-income residents throughout the state of California, including here in the city of Hollister, and we're hoping to bring 100 new units to the city. The West of Fairview Affordable Project will be 100 units of low-income affordable housing for farm workers and families. Translated into numbers, 30 to 50% AMI, families would be earning, a family of 4 would be earning less than $55,000 a year. So these are critically needed affordable units. We've also secured these very important project-based vouchers that will make the project financially feasible. And in supporting this resolution today to adopt the environmental assessment and the FONSI, we'll actually officially be able to accept the land donation from Ward Homes and hopefully move forward with construction. So I hope that you will support this request today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Casey, those are all the public comments for this item.
All right, I'm going to close the public hearing for this item. All right, so let's open this up for any deliberation. Councilmember Resendez.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak. I'm 100% in support of it, but after hearing you speak, I just want to say thank you for coming out here tonight. We look forward to continuing our partnership and working with you. We desperately need affordable, AKA critical affordable housing units here, and we'll do anything we can to make that possible. And I've got to say, I'm pretty disappointed that the high school would oppose this in any way. So thank you for being here tonight.
Councilmember Morales.
No questions, ready to vote.
I just agree with Councilmember Resendez. Thank you so much for coming out and for all the work you do. I'm well aware of Eden Housing, so I'm glad you're partnering with us, and I'm looking forward to seeing that get built. So I think if there's no further discussion, can I get a motion to approve this item?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. All right, so we're going to move on to council business. Item 1, item 1 we canceled. Item 2 is informational report related to traffic studies requested by City Council. Can we have the staff report?
Okay, we're going to have Christian from our engineering department come up while Paul sets the presentation up for us.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. This next item is an informational report regarding traffic studies that have been requested. The first traffic study that is before you is the Sunny Slope on Beverly Drive. Currently, it's a two-way stop, and this will be a traffic study to determine if this intersection will be all-way control stops, so four stops total. The next item is also a four-way stop at San Benito and Hawkins, so this will determine the same thing as the other traffic study to make sure that this is something that is warranted for the all-way stop. The next intersection is South Street and Sally Street. Currently, there's only 2 stops, and this will determine if it's necessary to have an all-way stop. The next item before you is the San Benito Street traffic calming. This is to determine the type of traffic calming between Hawkins and Nash. This traffic study will determine the type of improvements that will be installed on San Benito Street in order to do the traffic calming. Before you, you have the cost for each individual traffic calming and also traffic study for the intersections that I just mentioned. City staff is requesting direction from council as to which projects or which studies they would like to see the city move forward with. I would like to note that city staff is not recommending to conduct the traffic calming study on San Benito, at least not at this time, for several reasons. One of the main issues is that currently there is a lot of infrastructure that needs to be updated, such as the water line, the sewer line. There's a lot of issues with drainage at some of the intersections. So rather than moving forward with some type of traffic calming, which will require to do surface improvements, the city would like to wait until later on so that we could put together a project that will update the infrastructure and then see if there's any traffic calming that will be required. I would also like to note that there was a traffic study that was conducted in 2020 or 2021. I can't remember exactly which of those, but I believe it was 2020, that indicated that there was no speeding on San Benito Street. The average speeds were 33 miles an hour. The current speed limit that is posted out there is 30 miles. The city is currently installing additional speed limits along with the speed feedback signs just to mitigate any of the speeding that is happening. But according to the study that was done back then, there wasn't any speeding to be amended at this time.
Christian, if I may, as well, we have one for Jan Avenue and Spring Drive. We did have it corrected. We did have it in the packet as Jane Avenue, so my apologies there. Jan Avenue, we do get requests for that one through the office, and that is off of West Side. So if you're coming down 156, or the old 156, 4th Street, and if you're going towards San Juan Bautista and come make a left onto West Side, it would be Jan is your first right. And Jan and Spring gets a lot of requests as well. So we felt we'd put it on for this one as well, since we were discussing other ones that had come through.
And with that, that's the end of the presentation. Any questions and direction for staff?
Do you have any questions, Councilmember Resendez?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess my first question is, like, what's the process? Why are we hearing this at a city council meeting? I thought we had, like, discretion to, like, get them to you and then do traffic studies, or did that change? I'm not 100% sure why we're hearing it here tonight.
Well, many of these came through consensus at the end of the meeting, and so we brought them all forward in their totality.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that explanation. And then the traffic calming on San Benito, well, we can do the study. I understand the concerns about the infrastructure. I'm assuming it's coming from your department, but we can still do the study. It doesn't mean we don't have to do we can do the improvements later. But we can still do the study, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can go forward with the study. This is one that we've had. I mean, there was an accident out there, I don't know, a handful of months ago. We had a lot of, I think all of you received input from the community. We did in our office as well. And, but in going through it, if we want to just, in full disclosure, if we were to invest in a study, we still, I mean, even right now we have a portion of San Benito that's closed for repairs.
That's what I'm saying. The biggest concern is the infrastructure underneath the road. That is correct. The sewer, the water pipes that keep breaking.
The storm drains as well.
The storm drains. Let's be 100% honest with that, about that. That's the biggest concern. So just to be clear with the public, we don't want to do any improvements until we fix that first. I'm going to stop right there because this is something I'm real passionate about. I go on and on and on, but this is question time. So I'm just wondering if we can do the study and not have to do the improvements.
Councilmember Morales.
Thank you, and thank you for the pictures, because that, at least for me, it makes it a little bit more, like I get it. Do you have any data points on like the options that we brought consensus? Like, did we have 30 people complain in terms of safety on San Benito and Hawkins Street, for example?
So our office did get a petition from several members of the public with concerns about speeding on San Benito. They went ahead and completed the application for speed cushions, even though it's no warrant because of the policy that is in place. They still wanted to go ahead and collect the signatures to show the support. So there's quite a few residents concerned with speeding. However, as stated before, according to the study that was done a couple years ago, it didn't seem that there is actually speeding happening on San Benito. Another reason that we feel that could be is the fact that there was not enough signage. There was only one speed limit northbound. So currently we're working with the Public Works Department to install additional speed signs along with the speed feedback signs, which are the ones that will tell you the speed, to see if that will provide some type of traffic calming as far as people speeding on San Benito.
I can tell you some data points. I've walked both sides of that street, and I can tell you every single resident that lives on the street would tell you that that's their number one priority, is the speeding. Several people feel like, anyways, that's high safety concern. And I understand that you did a traffic safety study, but I think to Mr. Rosena's point is we could probably do the study to see what it might look like, but I understand that the infrastructure is obviously something that we want to consider to do at the same time. Do you have any other data points on the other streets in terms of like the frequency or how many people?
At the other intersections, our office received just a few concerns with safety as far as not being able to pull from the intersection because vehicles traveling too fast, but not as many as we received on San Benito.
Yeah, and some were asked via consensus at the end of the meeting, so that's where we bundled those as well.
And my question is, it's not just, if I remember correctly, some of those intersections, there were accidents at those intersections, and that
correct
drove part of this as well. Question around the policies that we did recently. We did one for the speed cushions, but I thought we had done one regarding traffic calming generally. Didn't we have a full-on policy about how that comes about or not?
I don't believe there's a policy for traffic calming.
So it was just for speed cushions?
Correct.
That's all we did? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I heard Councilmember Morales' points about getting data, and the other question I had for you is, we're talking about all of, the whole traffic calming idea, but weren't we also talking about a stop sign at San Benito and Hawkins? And I think that was kind of what drove the most recent comments I heard, is someone got injured right there. So
correct.
We're looking at a four-way stop there that may help.
Exactly.
And city manager, I know we've got things to do on that street, but we don't have a timeline, do we? As far as when all that would be done, it's not happening in the next 6 months to a year.
That is correct.
So, okay. Well, those are.
And so, Mr. Falgo, I don't know if you were wanting to provide some input on the.
Yeah, I can. Just a data point that we actually did an all-way stop control study at Hawkins a few years ago, and it didn't meet warrants. The side street traffic the volumes weren't significant enough, and the sight distance just didn't meet the warrants. So, but I do understand we could collect data and see if it meets warrants for calming or something else, from a speed study standpoint. Yeah. And it could be a partial. Instead of doing the full layouts and everything, we could do it step by step and say, does it meet warrants for to even look at traffic calming, or should we just stop here?
All right, I see what you're saying. Question for you, though, about, I know you look at things like the number of vehicles, right?
Yeah.
How do you gauge the amount of pedestrian traffic, though? Because I know there's a lot that crosses.
Those are counted as well as part of it, and it is part.
How do you do that? I'm curious.
Yeah, and I'm not
Somebody
a
stand
traffic
out there
engineer, so but I have been reading these things, and so there are 4 warrants or so, and one of them is side street volume is one of the major ones. If the stop side streets have enough volume, including pedestrian and bicycle, then that counts towards meeting the warrant for an all-way stop. So it's one of the items. There's about 4 different ways with some subcategories that, in order to figure it out. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. You have another question? Okay.
So some of the concerns I've heard is, the speeding, but really the concern, at least in San Benito and Hawkins, is that people just are not paying attention. And so they don't necessarily have to be speeding. People felt like trying to cross the street, trying to walk their dog, that people are just not, and I know that you can't control that. You can't control, people's behavior that way. But is there anything that can be done to just address the safety? Because it's really much like, hey, I don't want to get hit by a car, whether it's at 25 miles an hour or 45 miles an hour. I just don't want to be hit by a car.
So the only thing that I could think of is there's currently a striped crosswalk, which is not a high visibility crosswalk because it's not in proximity to the school. It is close to the school, but it doesn't meet the criteria to be close enough to be a high visibility crosswalk. We could definitely take a look to see if we could do some type of pedestrian crossing with the flashing beacons, but that's obviously something we'll have to look into it.
Yeah, at least for that, if we can explore that option, that would be what I'm asking for.
And that brings me to another question. So you said high visibility. What's the difference in crosswalk? What do you do that's different that makes it high visibility?
So one of the things is the color of the striping. So if you're within 500 feet of a school, it has to be yellow.
Okay.
If it's past the 500 feet, it could be white, or it has to be white. There's also the reflectors that you put on the ground, which is not the ones that you see on 4th Street, but it's more like the, just to make it more visible, and so that when somebody's crossing, the cars are easier to, or the people driving are easier to visualize somebody out on the street.
Okay. Do we have any more questions, or can we take public comment now? Take public comment? Do we have any public comments on this?
Mayor Casey, there's no public comments for this item.
Okay, so let's have a little more discussion. Councilmember Resendez, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. Quite a few, I'll be honest with you. So I don't live in all of these. The only one that's in my district is Jan and Spring, and I can tell you that over the years I've got a number of phone calls specifically about that one, specifically about the kids that are going to HPS. And I know that we don't count like school traffic and whatnot, but with all of these, I'll be honest, I guess, is that it's probably been a little while since we last did it, and we just came back from a pandemic. So I don't know if everything was fully like functional at the time. But Sunny Slope and Beverly, I get concerns and calls about that, I'll be honest, personally. Jan and Spring, and the other ones I drive, and I can tell you that I agree with doing traffic studies with all of them. With the San Benito and Hawkins traffic calming, 100% yes, we have to do the study. As I understand the staff's concerns, and I completely respect your concerns, but I think that we have to do the study now, and then we can look at how we can creatively work together in partnership with the residents there to mitigate some of the things that they're seeing, because it's happening. And when you have that many people that passionate about wanting to change something, then we need to do something about it. And I canvass every single election. I've walked there too, and every time I walk where they're speeding, but that one, they were particularly reaching out to us, all of us, and we've got to do something. So I can't not support not doing the study. Let's start with that. Now I'm going to get on my infrastructure soapbox really quick, and I promise I'll get down. But this is why we need to do the master plans for the sewer. This is why we need to do the master plans for the collection. This is why we need to do all of those things before we add to our existing problems. I'm going to get down from my soapbox. But yes, 100%. And then, yeah, I'm just wondering what the protocol is, I guess, in the future. Residents reach out to us all the time. And if I see a pattern when I'm canvassing, I'd like for us to have the ability just to do a traffic study. And I thought we had that, where we could just mention it to you. And maybe we even had comes out of our discretionary funds or something like that. But I'd like for us to have that ability so we don't have to bring it here. But let's get the studies done, let's get the results done, and then let's do something or not do something about it and go on the record about that. Thank you.
Councilmember Morales, what are your thoughts?
So is the, I should have asked this earlier, but is the ask that we have to pick one? I thought, can we do them all? The recommendation is San Benito, let's look at the infrastructure as we're looking at whatever we're going to do just because we need to do it. So that was my understanding and how I take it. And I also understand that we have the funds to be able to pay for this because we have a lot of different funding sources to cover the costs. It doesn't have to come out of our discretionary fund. Is that accurate?
For these, yes, that is accurate.
Okay. So I'd say these are the areas that at least we were all in agreement to move forward. My recommendation is that we should move forward with all these projects. I think for San Benito Street, want to really lean into the staff and recommendations, understanding that we do need to do infrastructure work. But I think in just walking several times and talking to the residents, that is their number one concern. And the concern, it may not be very clear, black and white, it may not be speeding, but I feel unsafe. I feel unsafe to even back up from my driveway. I feel like I'm gonna get hit. Could be because they're distracted, but the bottom line is crossing the street, it is unsafe. Whether it's speeding or something else, I think that's basically the underlying issue that needs to be addressed.
Okay, so my thoughts are this. I mean, I think the stop signs that we're looking at, I mean, those are pretty much every one of them, to me, has accidents and things attached to them, and they're relatively inexpensive. I'd be supportive of those. I'm a little questioning the traffic calming. It's $60,000. We're not talking about $9,000. We're talking $60,000. What does that involve? What are you doing for that study?
Okay. That would involve obviously collecting speed data, but then having 2 or 3 public outreach meetings with all the residents. That's a big chunk of that budget because there's online surveys, there's translation, there's, they're in person, as well as probably would be a Zoom component to that too, so that we can get as much participation as possible. From typically we would not bring a layout to the first one, but from that first one, the input we get would create a layout which would think Sally Street.
So it's the full on, yeah. So you're talking about a full on.
We would bring then that layout back, get more comment on it, and then once we kind of have what the consensus or what we have the results of both of at least 2 public outreach meetings, then we would come back to you guys.
Right, yeah. I gotcha. I get the process now, but again, I have to ask the question, if we're going to be tearing up the street to do things, does it make sense to go through those kinds of meetings, get people's hopes up, and then go, oh, we can't put in all these things because we're about to do some work on the street? Well, that's the problem.
Sorry,
go
jumping
for
the
it.
gun.
Tell me.
Like Sally Street also included there was a pavement issue on Sally Street and a water line issue on Sally Street and a little bit of sewer, and so we bundled that all in together, and those really weren't part of the traffic calming study because the civil engineer's best work is buried usually, and so they don't care about that. But we lump those in for the same reasons that Christian already brought up. Mm-hmm. So those can be quantified and estimated while the study's going on, and we can bring that back to you guys to be as part of the whole project that we're estimating.
So we might be able to do the same kind of thing.
Could totally.
That makes more sense to me. I just hate to see all this excitement and $60,000 spent, and then okay, well, we got to wait 3 years to get this other piece, and then the data's outdated.
I would want to design it together as you get efficiencies out of it, and it would be one project just like Sally Street.
And does that jive with what we're thinking capital improvements wise and all that? Because we're talking a big chunk of money if they're going to do some kind of road calming.
Yeah, and I mean there would be options. Whatever ends up getting designed would come back to council multiple times as part of the CIP project for a bigger discussion.
Okay. Let's see.
And
Councilmember Resendez.
Thank you. So quick follow-up. Councilmember Morales said that there's funding. I just want to be clear. Is there earmarked funding from tax revenue, or is this coming out of general fund? Because you said it's not discretionary. I get that. Is it earmarked? Is it coming out of general fund? Where is the money coming from?
So for these studies, what we do is on these, we do work orders with the Kimley Horn contract, and that is a mix. Sometimes it's general fund, sometimes it is out of the road fund, depending on where we're at. So
Okay. And with this one, we don't know specifically.
yeah, I would have to.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah, and just going back, I was looking. These items were brought forward. The reason we brought these forward is these were on the council update list, and so we had published them in our packet that we would be bringing them to this meeting as part of the options at the end of the meeting. So that's why.
Okay. So any thoughts from the council on what you want to do? Any direction? Councilmember Resendez, what's your thought?
Yeah, my recommendation is to move forward with all of them, and then, yeah, that's it. Let's just start with that, and then bring back our reports, and then we'll go from there.
Councilmember Morales.
No, Sam, and thank you for explaining. I think the residents are going to be very happy to hear that their voice will be included in San Benito, and I think you'll have at least a better understanding of like what the concerns are, and that it may not necessarily be speed, but it might be safety or plus anything else. So I think it'll give you a better understanding of kind of the design that we need in order to kind of fix the issue. But I agree we should move forward with all of them, and any infrastructure that can be done or needs to be done should be included as part of that.
Yeah, and just to provide clarity, I just wanted to verify, due to the safety element of these, we are able to use non-general fund dollars to do the studies.
Okay, before I say, I just want to ask one last question. You're going to do some speed surveys, and well, what if the data all shows that it doesn't warrant anything? Then what? If it's all within the speed limits, then what do we,
Yeah, and so most all but one is an always stop control, and speed is not. Stop controls are not traffic calming. They are not speed.
I'm specifically thinking of San Benito Street and the traffic calming.
What we can do at that point, if there's not a warrant for it, then we can. And I'm not sure that would necessarily preclude it from happening, because it sounds like there's other concerns, and so there could be the outreach at least and find out what those concerns are, and if there's a redirect that needs to happen, then we can come back and redirect our efforts.
Okay. Given all that, I'm supportive as well, so I think we've got direction then. We don't need to vote on this, right? It's just informational. We're good with moving ahead?
I think we have consensus for all of the options that were brought forward. So
let's go with it.
Okay.
All right. Right. Time for our municipal legislative update. Do we have a staff report?
Mayor Casey, council members, my name is Rob Lamelli with the City Attorney's Office. I'm glad to be back and giving you your newest quarterly municipal legislative update. There aren't too many things on the agenda, so it should be fairly quick. We'll start off with local government. We're first looking at Senate Bill 386. Senate Bill 386 introduced significant amendments and additions to the elections code, aiming to refine and enhance the electoral processes within the state. It was sponsored by Senator Josh Newman, and the bill received bipartisan support. Key aspects of SB 386 include modifications to the statistical sampling method for verifying signatures on petitions, adjusting the required content of ballots, and imposing additional duties on local elections officials. The bill notably repeals certain requirements for ballot instructions in presidential elections, streamlining the content to presumably make ballots more accessible and easier to understand for voters. One of the pivotal changes introduced by SB 386 is the adjustment of procedures for the examination and verification of signatures on electoral petitions. It allows for the use of statistical sampling to ascertain the validity of signatures with specific thresholds set to determine when a full verification process is necessary. This is intended to expedite the verification process, making it more efficient while maintaining accuracy and integrity. Part of SB 386 also requires part of the inclusion to enhance transparency and accessibility regarding municipal election. It also requires city elections officials to post and publish notices about nomination papers, including details about the offices to be filled, the availability of nomination papers to incumbents, and the impact of redistricting on incumbent eligibility. The measure ultimately aims to improve public awareness and participation in municipal elections. Moving on to Senate Bill 29. This was sponsored by Senators Steve Glazer and Rosalise Ochoa-Bowe. SB 29 codifies a political reform education program, or PREP, in statute, authorizing the FPPC to establish and administer an educational program for individuals who violate the act as an alternative to administrative, civil, or criminal penalties. The program aims to educate violators with little or no experience with the Political Reform Act, offering a rehabilitative approach rather than punitive measures. Moreover, the bill allows the FPPC to charge a fee for participation in PREP with the stipulation that it not exceed the reasonable cost of administering the program. It also mandates filing officers to waive late fees for individuals who complete PREP or were unable to file timely due to serious illness or hospitalization. We'll then go to Assembly Bill 1448, which is cannabis enforcement by local jurisdictions. AB 1448 was sponsored by Assemblyman Greg Wallace, and it focuses on enhancing local jurisdictions' enforcement capabilities against unlicensed cannabis activities. This legislation was developed to address the challenges posed by unlicensed cannabis operations, reinforcing local authorities' power to implement and enforce cannabis-related laws effectively. This bill was introduced against the backdrop of the AUMA, or Prop 64, which authorizes commercial adult use cannabis activity under state licensure and applicable local ordinances. AB 1448 specifically allows local jurisdictions to impose administrative fines or penalties on violations of local laws related to cannabis and cannabis products, essentially allowing localities to utilize an administrative citation process with some of this enforcement. As part of their ability to be able to do this, the key provisions of AB 1448 include a 50-50 cost state-local split of the statutory penalties that are recovered in actions that are brought by local jurisdictions. So essentially, the penalty will first be used to reimburse the prosecuting agency, so it would either be the city attorney or the district attorney's office. Once the reimbursement had occurred, 50% of the remainder, if any, would be paid to the county or city as applicable, and the remainder would be deposited in the state's general fund. The 50-50 split of these funds essentially would go towards enabling more enforcement actions to be able to combat some of this unlicensed and unlawful cannabis production. Moving on to Assembly Constitutional Amendment 13. If you recall, we spoke last year about the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act and how it was attempting to change the voting thresholds and the requirements for cities to be able to increase fees or collect taxes or to pass taxes. This was passed, excuse me, this was passed really because of that act itself. And what this does is it's aimed at modifying voting thresholds for ballot initiatives, specifically those that propose to amend the state constitution to alter voter approval requirements for passing state or local measures. This amendment stipulates that any ballot initiative seeking to increase the voter approval threshold for future measures must itself be passed by the same higher threshold that it proposes. If you recall, under the Taxpayer Protection Act, it was attempting to require a 2/3 vote for any tax to ever be passed moving forward, yet it itself only required a majority vote to pass. And so what this is intending to do is say, if you're going to do require 2/3, and you need to pass by 2/3 as well, under the initiative process. So ACA 13 also grants local governing bodies the authority to conduct advisory votes on governance issues, allowing local voters to express their opinions on specific matters. These advisory votes are designed to gauge community sentiment about having binding effect or without having binding effect on local policy decisions. This emergence, again, emerged in response to the concerns about special interests that were attempting to manipulate California's electoral process through the initiative. We briefly did discuss Senate Bill 553, which was the Occupational Safety, Workplace, and Violence Prevention. We have received additional information for this, although it is still, in development, and our firm is actively working with clients in order to be able to establish, the policy plan that needs to be implemented by July 1 of, I believe, this year, July 1st, yes, of 2024. And so, in addition to that, we've gotten additional information about what a plan or what these workplace violence prevention plans have to include. And a list of them is name and job titles of persons responsible for implementation, the effective procedures to obtain active involvement of employees and union reps to develop and implement a plan, the methods the employer used to coordinate implementation, effective procedures to ensure supervisory and non-supervisory employees comply consistently. There's also development of effective procedures to communicate with employees about workplace violence matters, effective procedures to respond to actual or potential workplace violence emergencies. In addition to several others that will also be included within that workplace violence prevention plan. And again, we are currently working to draft some model plans because it seems as if the state will not likely provide any actual guidance regarding what these should look like for about 2 years. So, in addition to that, there was also Senate Bill 428 regarding temporary restraining orders that are now allowable for workplace harassment. So SB 428 was sponsored by Senator Catherine Blakespear, and it expands California's workplace violence restraining order law to also cover workplace harassment. Effective January 1, 2025, employers can seek temporary restraining orders not only for threats of violence, but also for harassment against employees. This change aims to allow earlier intervention before harassment escalates into violence. For terms of this, harassment is defined as a knowing and willful course of conduct directed at a specific person that seriously alarms, annoys, or harasses a person, and that serves no legitimate purpose. The course of conduct must be that which would cause a reasonable person to suffer substantial emotional distress and must actually cause substantial emotional distress. So this expands the ability for these temporary restraining orders to be obtained. Again, a temporary restraining order cannot be obtained which would prevent free speech or any of the protected activities under the National Labor Relations Act. And then last, I believe, we have Assembly Bill 817, which discusses open meetings and teleconferencing for subsidiary bodies. This bill, if passed, would allow until January 1, 2026, a subsidiary body of a local agency to teleconference without meeting all of the teleconferencing requirements of the Brown Act. So a subsidiary body is defined as a legislative body that meets all of the following criteria: is a commission, committee, board, or other body of a local agency, whether permanent or temporary, decision-making or advisory, created by charter, ordinance, resolution, or formal action. They serve exclusively in an advisory capacity, and they are not authorized to take final action on legislation, regulations, contracts, licenses, permits, or any other entitlement. An example would be like your Arts and Culture Commission or your Parks and Rec Commission or the Airport Commission. In order to try to increase the public's involvement in these types of commissions, they're trying to expand the manner in which they can appear remotely so that individuals can participate more frequently within these types of commissions. So this would allow a subsidiary body to use teleconferencing without meeting the requirements of the Brown Act. They would still need to post agendas at the or they would not need to post agendas at a teleconference location. They would not need to identify each teleconference location in the notice and agenda. They would not need to make each teleconference location accessible, and they would not have to meet the requirement that at least a quorum of the members of the subsidiary body were in the location of their jurisdiction. And that is all I have for this evening. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Councilmember Sendes, any questions?
Thank you. I don't know if you said when they're taking effect, but I'm assuming that they're taking effect at the beginning of the year.
So the ones that are on the horizon are moving through the legislature.
Oh, got it.
The initial items have already taken effect. So it would be, so these that are on the horizon, this one goes into effect July 1, 2024. These others, this is potentially, this is an initiative that's on the ballot, but all of these other ones have already taken effect.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Morales, any questions?
Thank you. On 553, we had asked, I think, a question at your last presentation, whether that included elected officials.
So there are instances, I believe, wherein it may apply. But essentially, the determination of that would be in those few instances where an elected official were to be considered an employee. Because this primarily applies to those employees as part of the program. And so there are a few very, there's a very narrow set of circumstances that would apply in order to allow an elected official to be considered an employee.
Anything else? Do we have any public comment?
Mayor Casey, we don't have any public comments for this item.
Okay, well, unless anybody has anything further, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to item 4, informational report on fiscal year 2023-24, quarter 2, budget monitoring. We have the staff report.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council. I am Casey Astorga, the city's Admin Services Director. And tonight before you will be a mid-year budget monitoring presentation. And I'll be providing the presentation. We have City Manager David Marioni to add to it, as well as all members of the departments are here if there's any specific questions for us today. And I have the clicker. There we go. So tonight's staff's recommendation is for the City Council to receive the informational budget monitoring update for quarter 2, which is also known as mid-year, for the current fiscal year, which is 23 through 24, and provide feedback or direction to staff. Again, the fiscal year starts on July 1st, 2023, and ends on June 30th, 2024. Our second quarter analysis looks at a 6-month period or the middle of the year. So you'll see it noted throughout the presentation and in the staff report as both mid-year or Q2 for the second quarter. Our city's fiscal and budget policies require staff to provide this quarterly update to the City Council, which is part of what we're doing here tonight. And through this analysis, there's an aspect of it being a science, looking at the actual data, and certainly the art side of understanding what is meant by that data. And that's where we're having the conversations with our departments of how actual revenues and expenditures are trending against our adopted budget. You'll see this noted as a year-to-date or YTD data in the reports. However, staff has and always does look at every single line item in our budget all the time. So this analysis is a summary level, although we do evaluate it regularly on a daily basis at that detail level. And as we get that information, we want to understand that why. Why do our year-to-date actuals ebb and flow? And is that good news or bad news, cause for concern, or is that totally normal? So you see that in our analysis tonight. So through our meetings, the Admin Services Department, myself and our team here met with every single department in the city and looked at that year-to-date budget activity and asked about their needs for the remainder of the fiscal year. With the adoption of this fiscal year 23-24 budget, just like any budget, it's a policy document. It sets our path and our work plan and our staffing plan for the next 12 months. Here we are at mid-year, and that's often the time where there are requests based on evolving demands. We do have a list of requests from our departments. However, tonight we wanted to get input and feedback from the City Council before moving forward with any of those requests. Should we get direction tonight, we can certainly come back at a subsequent meeting to move forward, and if there's any action required by City Council, we can consider it then. That final bullet point there is that the city continues to be in what I'm calling a recovering budget phase, where we're moving away from the pandemic. We have a different budgeting philosophy. However, we aren't quite yet at this recovered budget phase. Part of this is understanding the revenues that come in and our service demands, and that ties into both our local and regional economies. So the next couple slides, we'll talk about both the California economy and then specifically the Hollister economy. So the California economy. So staff has a consultant through a few different layers, one of which being Beacon Economics, which is based in Los Angeles, that provides us with statewide information. And through their analysis, they're showing consumer spending did not plunge in 2023. I know it was a lot of different economists had different perspectives. Based on our economists, it did not plunge. The data did not show that, and so there were some surprises. Inflation has cooled. However, it is not yet at desired targets. I think we all recognize that. The cost of borrowing money remains above 2022 levels, so still more expensive to borrow money and do any projects that require the use of borrowed money. The cost of borrowed money, however, is expected to become less expensive as those rates presumably will change in the near future, and there's an estimate that at the end of the 2024 calendar year, we might see some activity at the federal level. The final bullet point does showcase that because of these factors, households are prioritizing purchases, but only of essential items, and they are deferring purchases of non-essential items. So it's a little different than the conversation that was happening during the pandemic, where households were choosing not to make any purchases in some respects because they didn't have the disposable income. Now we're seeing that purchases are being made. We're not deferring maintenance on a vehicle, but we're only prioritizing those essential items in the households. The Hollister economy specifically, and this is where I want to talk about both what the macro and micro economies may exist. And one of the examples that I like to touch on is microclimates, because we're all aware of that, especially in our region here. If you drive 10, 15 miles in any direction, it feels different, right? It might be cloudy, might be overcast, might be way too hot. Very different here. Same thing with our economies. So when we have conversation about how is Hollister doing, I think it's the same type of perspective to keep in mind of we're on a bit of an island out here. I know we're close, within 30 miles of a lot of regional hubs, but we're very different at the same time, and our data shows that. The sales tax is often a good indicator of how your local economies, those microeconomies, are doing. And the city does have a consultant to track and monitor sales tax data on a regular basis throughout the year. Staff does meet with that consultant. They are HDL. We meet quarterly to look at all the activity, every single business here, the clusters, the regions throughout our community, and how is a certain, how's downtown doing, how's Hollister Farms doing, how's these certain regions doing. We gather that information and understand if staff needs to make a recommendation to council to do anything differently. For the most part, it's informational, so we understand how our economy is doing. The final bullet point is something I want to reiterate. We are unlike our neighboring economies, and there'll be a slide that shows this. And that's not a good or bad variable. We're just a little different just based on our geography, our connection to the neighboring regions, and there's going to be a data point that talks about that here. So this is essentially what we're calling the Central Coast. So our consultant in HDL provides this to show our sales tax data, and this is showing quarter by quarter regional sales tax data by county. So San Benito County, which Hollister being the lion's share of San Benito County, we kind of wag the dog in that respect. So we are the green column here. The purple column is what we're calling the Central Coast, which includes Monterey, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, and San Benito County. So that purple column is a summary level of what we're calling the Central Coast. So this is a good example of Hollister's microeconomy, where we may hear conversations about someone 30 miles or 100 miles down the road is having a good time or a tough time with their economy. I would caution us to look very closely at the Hollister economy because it might be unlike what's happening in our neighboring jurisdictions. And this is a good example, quarter by quarter regional sales tax. So this is looking at quarter by quarter because with the spring and summer seasons, we want to track spring and summer versus spring and summer, holiday seasons versus holiday seasons. And we see where our neighboring agencies potentially had tough times, where they were in the negative. Hollister in San Benito County was in the positive in the last 12 months. So that's why I just want to emphasize that Hollister is a microeconomy. Again, not a good variable, not a bad variable, but a variable to consider. There are a handful of factors supporting our existing economy. We've worked to stabilize our existing tax base through programs through the City Council, through outreach efforts through staff, but also all of our partners in town to really support our existing businesses, their employees, to make sure that they are getting what they need and that they are successful. We've also expanded our tax base as a city. There are new businesses in town. There are new hotels. We now see the data for those new businesses coming into town. What's highlighted here is we now have a full 12 months of sales tax data for the Hollister Farm Shopping Center. We now have roughly a year for the Holiday Inn Express and Suites that opened in December of 2022. And then as we've discussed previously, Amazon is a stable and continues to be growing presence in Hollister. Also in support of Hollister's economy is our demand for development services. So whether or not someone is building something, constructing a project, small or large, and if they're purchasing items here in town, we're getting that over-the-counter sales tax. And if for some reason they're purchasing items out of the area, out of the state, quite frankly, and they're having those products delivered into Hollister for that project, we get the benefit of that use tax that's subject to that transaction. So given that information, we have our mid-year summaries and some projections. With a reminder that our general fund budget through the adoption of the 23-24 budget did rely on the use of fund balance, and some can consider that like a savings, but in the use of the fund balance to balance our budget, including the use of federal funds or the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funding, as a one-time revenue replacement in support of the general fund. However, the next two bullet points do show that based on our year-to-date activity, we are projecting general fund revenues to come in slightly over budget. I want to emphasize slightly. And similarly, on the general fund expenditures, projecting to be slightly under budget. So again, that's where we are a recovering budget in general, where we're not yet where we want to be, but we're working towards stabilization. General fund revenues do include elements like sales tax, property taxes, our share of property taxes, TOT, the transient occupancy tax, also known as the hotel tax, permit and licensing fees, those over-the-counter fees, and charges for service, franchise fees, and a handful of others. Our sales tax consultant looked at the data, looked at the region, and continues to project a flat economy for the duration of this fiscal year for 23-24. Our economy is relatively stable. If we remember the pandemic, and we would hear those jurisdictions that were subject to tourism, that they had a huge hit if it was indoor tourism where they would host conferences in hotels or conference centers. Hollister doesn't have that type of draw, and so we weren't potentially impacted by that. There are also regions that had a huge draw for outdoor recreation, and so they saw potentially a spike during the pandemic because outdoor recreation was prominent. Hollister also doesn't have that draw yet. I know that's a conversation that we're having right now as a region. Because of that, we have stability. So we have built-in stability, and that's something that our sales tax data is showing. Our general sales tax, kind of the day-to-day over-the-counter sales tax, in addition to the Measure W sales tax, are both coming in slightly over budget. Our TOT revenues, again, that hotel tax, are continuing to be stable, including with that addition of that new hotel in town.
Casey, if I can just hop in. One piece that we're not touching on and highlighting, but I think if you're seeing the news today, just the state budget. You'll hear a lot about the state budget. You have the January budget where the governor releases budget, and then the legislative office will release what their analysis on it. They'll go back and forth. You'll see a May revise, and then they'll work to get their budget through in June. And so originally, the budget in January that Governor Newsom had projected had a $38 million gap, where the LAO had come back with a $58 million gap. They've revised it today to a $73 million gap, so you'll start to hear probably more and more about that. You have articles coming out. On our state side, that's more of discretionary grants that we receive that have come in. Not a tremendous amount of state grants that have come through, so you may hear that, us being a city not running social programs that may receive those types of funds. It's not as big of an impact to us. However, you do have the effects of the overall economy when the state is cutting their budget. But as you hear that, if you probably pop on your news tomorrow or even today on your phone, you may see some state articles about that. So thought it would be a point to make during this presentation.
And that's something that we're keeping our ear to the ground on, not only what's happening in other governments, including the state of California, but certainly the regional economy. A lot of the individuals that maybe reside in Hollister potentially drive a little bit to work somewhere else, understanding what that regional economy may mean for those that live in Hollister too. So we're certainly staying in tune with that. The next slide here shows our general fund expenditures on our year-to-date. So you see Q1 year-to-date spent, which is what we talked about a few months ago. The yellow column, middle of the screen, Q2 year-to-date spent, showing that bottom line total, just over $22 million. You reflect that based on the column titled Fiscal Year 23-24 Adopted Budget of $49 million. And you'll see year-to-date spent is roughly 46% of what has been budgeted. You'll notice there's a note at the bottom of the screen that's saying, based on what we know now, and things may change, but based on what we know now, we are projecting a general fund year-end expenditure spend somewhere between $46 million and $47 million. And again, you reference that $49 million budget, which is my earlier point that we're coming in potentially just a little bit below budget on the general fund expenditure side. So that's the general fund as a whole. The next few slides will talk about our department summaries through the second quarter or through that mid-year period. So the department level data talks about all funds department by department, which is how our budget book was adopted. Easier to read, easier to understand. It gets more technical in nature when you divide all the funds. But at a glance, you can see how a department is doing based on these next slides. And the very different funding sources are called out there. And again, this does cover that 6-month period. I just wanted to emphasize that. And things that could impact the reflection of whether it hits a December 31st timeline or a January, February, March timeline, it's really subject to our accounts payable process and our contracting process. And so you saw first quarter, relatively lower amount of data. If we were 25% through the year, we potentially didn't have 25% of activity. Similarly, so for 6 months of data, it might be a hair lower, where we expect to be 50% through the year. We've accounted for that in our year-end projections at this time, and we'll learn more and more information as we work to the next steps, which we talk about a few slides down. So again, this covers a 6-month period. We'll go department by department here. Admin services, which includes finance, risk, and human resources, with a budget of $3.1 million, all funds. Year-to-date spent at $1.4 million, or 44%. Airport, total budget of $2.6 million. Year-to-date spent $2.3 million, which maybe stands out at that 87% year-to-date spent. But that's reflective of some projects that have already done the lion's share of the work, in addition to our new airport director, which is analyzing their budget, juggling some funds in the right areas, some administrative changes, potentially some recommended changes to the budget at a future date. But that's because we've incurred a lot of those costs through that first 6-month period of the year. Again, that's the why part of the art and science. This is the art side, understanding the why. Our city attorney's costs through our contract with Lozano Smith. And I do want to highlight, this is a summary of our city attorney's costs. However, every department and division pays for their respective city attorney's costs. So if admin services has a need for city attorney, the admin services budget gets charged. If PD has a need for city attorney, the PD budget gets charged. So that's where at the summary level through Q2, where we had $750,000 budgeted across the city, we've spent $493,000 year to date. And that does include our agreement with Lozano Smith and a handful of other kind of outside of Lozano Smith. If there's an expert on the insurance side that we need to use their services, that's also included in that total dollar amount. City clerk, where we had $935,000 budgeted. Our year-to-date expenditures are just under $300,000, or 32%. However, we do expect additional costs to be incurred as we approach and get into election season. City council budget of $660,000 budgeted, $183,000 spent, roughly 28% of your budget. City manager, where there was just under $1.2 million budgeted, they've incurred $430,000 of expenditures, or roughly 36% of their budget spent. With the note that we do have assistant city manager that would start mid-March, so that's a token to our salary and benefits line being a little lower than 50%, as well as an active recruitment for our economic development manager position as well.
Casey, if you could go back a slide. on the service and supply side, you will see that that is over budget, and that's due to us having the recruitments for Peckham and McKinney for both the airport manager and the assistant city manager, hitting the city manager's budget, as well as a handful of other items such as our grant consultant and those type of costs. So that is where that's at, and that's something we look at mid-year.
With the city treasurer, one of the most straightforward budgets that we have, $41,000 budgeted, about $15,000 incurred, 37%. Development services, $4.4 million incurred, $2.9 million year-to-date spent, which is showing a 66% of budget spent. So our increase is showing due to contractual services that are also tied to a general increase in revenue that's brought in. That's how one of our agreements with one of our third-party contractors works, where the more work that they provide, the more revenue that they receive, that our costs go up, but also our revenues do go up at the same time. And also there's kind of what Dave was mentioning earlier about the administrative changes. So some of our engineering contractual services, which are no longer, engineering is no longer part of development services. When we built the budget, it was included, and so we're working to make an administrative change to make sure engineering contract services hit the appropriate engineering budget, which is now part of our public works department. So you'll see that same note as we discuss the engineering slide here, a $7.3 million budget and a year-to-date spent of $1 million, where this one is generally underspent at 15%, and you'll see development services overspent, and so you see some neutralization there once we do that administrative change. And also note we do have an active recruitment for our city engineer position right now, which will bump up our salary and benefits once that position is filled. Fire department, just under $14 million budgeted, and our year-to-date spent at $6.4 million, which is 40% of the total budget. And I did want to highlight the salary and benefit line item for overtime salaries. We had budgeted that at $1.5 million. Based on our current data, we think we're going to be just a hair over that, and that's given no large emergency that would require their services, which is a lot of the times out of our control. But we are seeing that it potentially could come in up to $1.7 million given the current status, and that second point below showing historical overtime costs, where we budgeted 1.5 this year. We're estimating that we may come in at 1.7 for overtime. However, last fiscal year, we were at $2.2 million in overtime costs. The fiscal year before that, in 21-22, we were at $1.4 million in overtime costs. And the year before that, in 2020 through 21, we were at 1.757 in overtime costs. So as you see, given the nature of any emergency that may pop up, a lot of those outside of our control, we are certainly looking to stabilize our overtime budget, and having that come in pretty darn close to where we are budgeted is certainly an improvement. On the IT side, information systems, they had a $1.9 million budget, and year-to-date spent, they're just under $600,000, which is showing as 30% of their budget spent. There's a lot of savings in the salary and benefits line item due to a couple of vacancies. We do have active recruitments for our assistant IT director and a IT analyst position. So you see those pop up once we get those filled. Parks and Recreation, $6.7 million budgeted, about $1.3 million year-to-date spent, which is roughly 20% of the budget. Again, this is one of those administrative changes where the Parks Division got juggled between Public Works and over in the Parks and Recreation Department. It now resides in Parks and Recreation, so there will be an administrative change to now accommodate that with the budget in the proper place. We're seeing the actuals hit the proper place, but not the budget in the proper place. So you see a footnote in this slide and the next slide.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, the budget being very large has to do with the Prop 68 park funds being budgeted into the capital side.
For the police department, just under $15 million budgeted, about 6.7 year-to-date spent, which is roughly 45% spent, generally on target, just a hair below budget. And this is where the public works side, you see the same footnote for the park staff from the public works to park side. They are at just under 23 million, 22.7 million. In their budget, just under $10 million spent, which is roughly 44%. So you'll see the change impact that year-to-date spent once we make that admin change. So this is all departments, all funds. So generally speaking, everything considered, we have a $102 million budget for the city. All departments, all funds. And so you'll see down below $48.7 million spent about halfway through the year, which is generally 48% spent. There was that large item in the non-department, kind of 2/3 of the way down the screen. That was really an administrative, what we call a journal entry, to make sure that we've accounted for those funds correctly. That showed up in the quarter one monitoring as well, where we moved $13.8 million from Fund 216 and created the dedicated Measure G fund, Fund 286. So that was very much an administrative change, but you'll see the $48.7 million number includes that $13.8 million transaction. So in general, you can maybe consider that significantly lower if you remove that $13.8 million transaction. Part of that's because projects are going to happen over the next 4 or 5 months, and some of the workload is beyond staff's current capacity. So you'll see it come back as part of the capital improvement plan, capital improvement project plan that'll be presented with the 24-25 budget, in terms of making sure something that's on the radar is on a schedule, and so that if it doesn't happen in fiscal year 23-24, that it happens in one of the subsequent years through the council adoption of that plan. Where do we go from here? So as we discussed earlier, there's going to be a series of administrative changes that do not in any way impact the bottom line. So staff does not have the authority to increase spending in any way, and so these administrative changes may just be between a couple different accounts with no impact on the bottom line. So where someone maybe is overspending in their office supplies, they may have savings from their professional services, and they'll be able to do an administrative change with no impact to their department's bottom line, and certainly no impact to the general fund or whatever fund they may be using's bottom line. So if there were a change to the bottom line, staff would come back to the city council for that recommendation and approval. If there's any direction or input that council wants to provide to staff tonight, we're certainly here to hear that. And we will use that information to reevaluate our mid-year budget, but also we're starting to build our 24-25 budget. That'll come in the next few months here. You'll see in March and April, all of our departments will meet again. We have mid-year data from 23-24. We're going to use that information based on our priorities from council, from our community, to understand what we need to do in the next fiscal year, in the next 12-month cycle. In April and May, the city council will receive a draft budget that will include the city's 5-year capital improvement project plan, the CIP plan, and the associated budgets showing where that money will come to fund that plan. In June, our city council will vote no later than June 30th to adopt that budget for fiscal year 24-25, which again is that next 12-month period. And again, I'll just revisit our recommendation today for the city council to receive this informational update and provide any feedback or direction to staff. And with that, we're here for questions.
Any for questions? Councilmember Resendez, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. So you made a statement in the beginning, or it was city manager, that we used a certain fund to balance the budget. I think it was like our rainy day funds or something.
So I believe it was, we used fund balance to balance our budget. So essentially the carryover from a prior year becomes our fund balance, essentially what's available in that account. And we use
How much was that?
I think on the general fund side, it was probably close to $13 million starting fund balance.
Okay, and was the 13.8 from COG? The 13.8 from COG, that wasn't part of that, was it?
Correct.
That's separate.
There's no change in that. That's essentially the Measure G money that we have received from COG, and essentially just putting it in the correct fund.
Okay.
So council member, for the balancing on the general fund side, roughly 8 in the balancing, and then overall all funds, it was roughly 2 million.
Okay. I've got quite a bit of questions, so bear with me. So when you're looking at the chart that shows the Central Coast and the trends, why, number one, why is it only showing the Central Coast? Why are we not looking at Los Baños or the South Bay area? We're considered South Bay area now, aren't we? Like that's our part of our region. We were taken out of Central Coast. So what I'd like to know, why are we not looking at all the other surrounding cities, and if we can?
I think we absolutely can. So HDL, our consultant, provides essentially any data that they have available to them, certainly publicly available data. And we can add different kind of regional geographic data points. I think there's historically, these were the Central Coast regions that the city had looked at, but if we get direction to add other regions, we can certainly do that as well.
Yeah, for me in particular, like you guys pointed out, like we're a special, unique little island over here. I think that I don't know how much we can rely on this data alone. I'd like to get a better picture and get more data the better, of the surrounding communities. And I don't know how much we identify with what they're doing in those cities. It's beautiful to look at, though. And if we can compare that to all the other surrounding cities and we're still looking at those types of trends, yay for us, right? The other thing is, can we look at past trends of that data, like previous years of that data?
Yes,
I'm wondering
absolutely.
how much of it is impacted by COVID, let's say, right? Because we are a bedroom community, and I'm wondering if that impacted the workforce and the tax revenue that we're generating here.
Absolutely, and we can piece that together for multi-years, maybe 5 years, so you can get a glimpse at pre-pandemic levels, where maybe a projection of growth in a normal economy, and where that could be. And that was actually an exercise that the city was required to do in recipient of the ARPA funds. So that was a useful resource, and we can show that data to see how we were pre-pandemic, what the trends have been both locally in Hollister and throughout the region, all of our neighbors.
Because that'll
and where that
simplify,
could be.
macro, so this will simplify our micro. And I thought it was funny how you used that analogy about cloudy in Monterey and sunny in Hollister. That was cool, it made me chuckle. Anyway, but I think it'll solidify like the trends that we're seeing here, but I just think that it's important to get more data and bring that back to us whenever. It doesn't have to be, it can be sooner, I would think, if it's just that, if it's okay with this council. I am wondering about the airport. It was 206 over on the service and supplies. You said those are all with for CIPs? That's unusually high.
I'd have to drill down to get that specific detail, unless, Jeff, do you know off the top of your head? It's okay if you don't. I'm putting you on the spot. I can certainly get that answer if we look at the line item detail of the activity in the airport line item.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and I hate to put you guys on the spot. I should probably ask these before, but some of these questions come up when you guys are doing these presentations.
I think we can look for it. If we can answer tonight, we will. If not, we'll certainly get back to the council.
Fire department. So you're going to have to walk me through this. I've been on the council for a while, and every year, like you guys noted, has been over budget when it comes to overtime. What's different about this year? Why are we not over budget now? And it's looking like you're projecting we're not going to be over budget at the end of the year. What happened?
So generally speaking, potentially a budget philosophy, where, don't hold me to this number, but I think last year the budget was around $500,000 or $600,000 for overtime, even though we knew historically, if you look at 21-22 as 1.5, 2020 through 21 is 1.7, and I believe the budget philosophy at the time was to budget low, and that would cause the actual expenses to be low as well. Our budget philosophy this year looked at historical data, and we tried to budget accordingly to historical data.
So what was our budget for overtime this year, 1.5?
1.5, correct, and we are projected to go just a hair over budget at that 1.7.
So we're still technically over on overtime. And my concern would be like, why? What's the root cause of that issue? Why are we coming in year after year after year over budget on overtime for the fire department? There's something not right about that. And why are we not addressing that? And I hate to put you guys on the spot about that. It's just, this is something I've seen. It looks good on paper that we're saying, well, we're coming in, we're not really over budget, but we have been, and it's not normal in any type of industry, private or public, to be over budget by that much. So that's just a huge concern of mine. And what can we do to address that? What's the root cause of the issue, and how do we resolve that? Because that's been a long-standing issue since I've been here. So,
yeah, absolutely. We can certainly look into that, and if there's
again, I hate to put you guys on the spot, but since we're talking,
we'll have interim Chief Dover come up, and then
you can talk to me later or whatever.
No, it's fine. I'd like him to address it. One thing I would add is when we did the budget, we looked at historically actuals over the last handful of years, and so that is where you saw the shift. And in previous years, it was, I believe, almost at all of those years that Casey has up there, it was budgeted at $600,000, and so if you're budgeted at $600,000 and come in at 1.7, and then $600,000
but
and
we're
1.4.
talking overtime. We're not talking everyday salary. We're talking overtime. So that to me stands out as a bit of a problem,
Understood. But from pulling the number 600,000 and budgeting that, we had to look at get it a little closer to the historic actuals. So as for how the overtime works, I'll pass it over to Chief Dover.
Of course, on the fire side of it, it's not like your standard corporation where if someone calls in sick, that work for that day just doesn't get done till the next day. We have contractual obligations to maintain certain staffing, and we try to prioritize, meeting that minimum staffing every day. If a firefighter were to call in sick and us not fill it, then we start sending our fire apparatus out understaffed. It puts us in a situation where it's difficult for us to meet the needs, especially if we get a major incident, or just be able to respond to incidents and try to meet our NFPA and all of our requirements for the fire service. Like I said, in the past, everything was done, the number that was projected wasn't really indicative of the operational needs of the department. And one way to combat the overtime number is to hire enough staff to backfill if firefighters call in sick. Now, we're working on doing that this year. We added some more personnel, but they're not past their training yet. So they're technically not filling those holes just yet. Once they get past their QABs and they're available to start working in all these different classifications, you should see a little bit better control on the overtime. Okay. Another thing we faced this year is we had some unexpected guys go out on workman's comp. So we're constantly having to fill those positions every day with an overtime call. And we had one on an administrative leave.
Okay, and then I'm just wondering, this is the common practice here. Is this the common practice within the other cities, that you're $1 million plus over on overtime for the fire department?
It is. If you dig in deep, which I did this a few years ago, I noticed a lot of the surrounding communities would, Monterey, for example, would put down their overtime this year. I'm kind of throwing a high number. It was going to be 12 million. When it came down to the end of the year, it was 15 or 17 million. I think Gilroy had an overtime budget of 700,000, and when they came in at the end of the year, it was 2.4 million. So this is very consistent across the communities. I think, like I said, the overtime that's projected is just not representative of what the operational needs of the department are. They try to set a number and make you adhere to something that's just impossible.
So then my other idea would be that we hire a consultant to really dig in, to look at the challenges that the chief is mentioning, and to see if we might need to change our operations or restructure things here, or what's going to better benefit us. So is that something we can do to address that issue?
To bring a consultant on to study that, it would just take a vote of the council to develop a contract. To go out, something like that, you would go out for RFP. That would be something we'd bring to you first. So we would need to get direction via consensus. If we got that, we would bring the RFP back. That would be something that would get voted on. We'd go out through a procurement process. Okay. Ultimately select someone and bring a contract back for consideration.
Okay. Thank you so much for explaining that to me. You answered the COG. Yeah, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Morales, questions?
So, Casey, first, I just want to say great job. It is really challenging to kind of go over the budget and summarize it and articulate it in a way that's simple. It's very complicated, but you made it seem really simple and easy to understand. So I want to say kudos, I know that's not the right word, but thank you. Thank you, I guess. I guess to my colleagues, I would ask, if we're asking for more information, my question and what I'm asking my fellow council members is, what is the research question you're trying to answer? If you do get those data points, what are you trying to answer? What are you trying to obtain? Sometimes we ask for information, and I think for our city, in terms of looking at priorities and looking at resource allocation, what is that going to get you? Is that nice to know, or is that a need to know? Do we absolutely need that? I'd rather have our staff, implementing, kind of looking at Q3, looking at strategies, planning, and investing time in. There's a lot of things that we need to do, and I would prioritize the things that we need to do versus the nice to know. And for the record, so I do know that within the budgets you can move money around. That's really easy to do, and it's actually very common. Every organization, corporate, private, government, moves money around because nothing is an exact thing. You will never get to that penny. It's always going to be off. You're always going to be moving money around. And it's at the end of the year, if you meet your financial goals, great, but also in government, there's a lot of unpredictability. because we serve the public and things happen. And so we also need to be able to look at what's happening within our community to prioritize those needs and making sure that our community is safe and gets what they need. So with that, thank you all for doing a wonderful job with all of your departments and your budgets. It is very clear that you're all working really hard, and and that's what leadership does, is leaders look at investing, planning, strategizing, motivating staff, and working within. And I know that the city of Hollister, all of our employees really are just extraordinary at looking at the resources and just maximizing that to where I haven't seen in any other jurisdiction. So I just want to say thank you so much for working. We are extremely lucky to have not only the department heads that we have, but also every single employee that just loves to be here and is working really hard to serve our community. So thank you very much.
I'm not sure if I have questions at this point. I mean, a lot of them have been asked already. I do want to say thank you as well, because it is a very complex topic, and you make it easy to understand. So thank you for that, and thank you to everyone who's working so hard to keep your budgets in line. And Chief Dover, thank you for explaining that this is an industry-wide issue. It's not a Hollister issue. So I have no interest in doing a study to find out that this is something that's happening. It's very hard to keep staffing when you don't know what you're going to need, when there's emergencies. So I get it. I think at this point, do we have any public comment on this?
Mayor Casey, there's no public comments for this item.
Okay, so do we have any other discussion, or are we done? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. Well, it's 8:15, and we're already at informational reports. This is good. So, Councilmember Resendez, do you have anything to report?
Thank you. I do. So again, I think that we need to know why one of our departments comes over budget by $500,000 or more every single year since I've been here on the City Council. It's pretty important. And if that is an issue, then I think we should find out why and how can we address that. So I'm going to ask the council to consider getting a consultant in here to help us figure that out so we can start to address that problem. So that's on the table. Also, a young lady, a Hollister Baylor by the name of Elisa Hernandez, played out of the country in El Salvador with a soccer team, and I'm hoping that we can agendize her and recognize her for her efforts in representing our city and on an international level. Those are my two things. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Morales.
I don't have anything.
Okay. So as far as committee work, last week we had the Animal Control Ad Hoc Committee, and we discussed, and I was asked to bring back, and I fully support the idea of amending the SNP bus contract to add vaccination of feral cats. One of the things that was brought up and discussed, particularly by our Deanna Barth, who does a lot of the wildlife work here, is that if we have feral cats that are sick with rabies or parvo, they can infect wildlife. They can also infect our domestic pets. So it's pretty important. And also, SNP has indicated that they are willing to provide the vaccinations at cost, which is pretty significant because they buy in very large bulk, so they can get it at a very reduced rate. The estimated cost for this would be $300 or less per clinic. So I'd like to get some consensus of the council to do this. And then I had one question about it for the city manager, that if we do give consensus, this is a fairly small amount, less than $5,000. Do we need to come back as an agenda item, or is it something that you have authority to just do if we give consensus on?
So it would require a contract amendment at $300 a clinic. I believe we would still be within my purchasing authority to amend.
So we've got to do the consensus on it then. Okay, and then had a meeting for LAFCO with Mayor Friels of San Juan Bautista in order to do city selection for the alternate person that sits on LAFCO for the city. We alternate. Some years it's Hollister, some years it's San Juan Bautista council member that serves as the alternate. It's a little nebulous as to how long the term is supposed to be, so it wasn't very clear. I know that Hollister had the city alternate position for a number of years. Last year we had someone, Councilmember E.J. Sabatia, appointed, so what we opted is to just renew and have E.J. Sabatia sit this year as the alternate, and then we're going to follow up with our new LAFCO attorney to get clearer direction on if we should be doing this every year or, have a term. So there was that. Intergovernmental committee, we had a discussion around Pinnacles National Park and naming it the home of Pinnacles National Park, our county. And so they want to work on promoting tourism, and they want to invite folks from various agencies and groups to come in and have some further discussion on that. So that'll be happening at future meetings. On COG, we had a special meeting to approve the contract for our new legal counsel, Sloan and Sakai. And that's pretty exciting because these are attorneys that specialize in transportation, and they're going to be pretty invaluable at helping us to negotiate on contracts, especially like with Caltrans. So also attended a leadership forum for economic development. This was a pretty big deal. The president of Cal ED was there, as well as a program director, and they kind of gave us the nuts and bolts around economic development, what it is, and also discussing the priorities that were outlined in the EDC's SEDS report. So we had some really valuable discussion and Q&A on how to overcome some of the obstacles that San Benito County faces. So that's the committee assignments. As far as just report out, I would like to see us, we've talked about it before, but last year we didn't manage to have an actual workshop on goal setting and priorities. And I'd really like to see that happen this year before we get to the meat of the budget. And I'd like to have it facilitated by an expert, so I'm looking for council consensus on this. Because it'll allow us to work together and develop our goals and priorities, and that's going to drive everything we do, including helping with the budget. And last year, we didn't actually have a workshop. We ended up with a 1-hour session where we all just kind of talked about things that are important, but we didn't really come up with a good goal setting. So I'm hoping we can get consensus on that. Also, one of my big priorities is the revitalization downtown. And so I'm asking if we can look at bringing back an agenda item or discussion around creating like a parking and green spaces program for downtown. Part of what makes the downtown vibrant is how easy it is to park and get into the downtown area. And with our parklets, we lost a lot of parking space. So I'd like to look at how we can improve that. And also green space has been shown to be a really add vibrancy downtown. So I know we're also doing individual improvements at Dunn Park, but maybe we could even look at a master plan to really update and revitalize it. It was once like this jewel of the downtown, and it was a place where everybody gathered. So it'd be nice to bring that, bring that back. So yeah, just looking for consensus to bring it back as a discussion item, and perhaps city manager could share with us if there's any specific funds that are out there available that might fall into those categories at all to help us if we wanted to do some work in that area. And then the last thing is I wanted to see if we could bring back the inclusionary housing ordinance. We didn't have full attendance when it was at last addressed, and so the item did not move forward, but I'd really like to see us adopt an inclusionary housing ordinance as soon as possible. So I'm requesting consensus to bring it back, and I know we can't bring back the exact same ordinance, so I'm asking to bring it back with a change in the breakdown of the 15% affordable from the proposed 7-5-3 split to a 6-5-4 split. So that'll change it so that we can actually address it again. And Councilmember Burns, at the time we did review it, was talking about learning from planning department, had talked about some creative ways to do alternative compliance. So perhaps they could bring back a little list for us to discuss as a part of that. And that's all I got. Did you have any items that you wanted to?
No, I just want to allow staff time to go through the items that we had identified as priorities.
Did you want to do a report?
Yeah. So I'll do consensus on this, and then we'll go into report. So Councilmember Resendez had asked for a consultant to take a look at the OT issue with the fire department. Okay. So 1, 2, no consensus on that one. The recognition of Eliza Hernandez for the soccer. Okay. Looking at amending the SNP bus contract to include vaccines at $300 a clinic.
Is that through your discretionary funds?
No, it would be just budget.
Okay, I would say no due to contract compliance. I'm big on contract compliance, so I would say no.
Okay, so.
2.
I think we have consensus, and my suggestion would be just to take it from one of our discretionary funds. I think I offered that to the community, but I forgot what you had said about that. What was coming back already? I don't remember our conversation, but that was my original idea. Just take it from one of our discretionary funds. I'm happy to give it to them.
My concern about starting to pull from discretionary funds is I feel like this should be part of the contract, and it should be part of the contract going forward, like every year. It just should be part and parcel. So I'd rather not do it discretionary wise. If that's the only way to do it, then fine. But
well, what I'm hearing, and just make sure I hear correctly, 1 yes with discretion, 1 yes without discretion, 1 no. So I don't think I'm hearing consensus, unless I'm misconstruing that, Jennifer.
I mean, I think Councilmember Resendez started with yes, and then.
Yes, just take it from my discretionary funds.
Yeah, so then I would agree with you that there's no consensus.
then I'm willing to, if he wants to take it from discretionary funds, that's fine. I want to see it done. I don't want it to fail on some technicality, and then we don't get what we need for the animals, so.
Okay. Bringing in a consultant to conduct a goal setting and council priorities workshop in coordination with the budgeting process. Okay, 2 to 1. A parking and green space program. I'll probably agendize that. We'll probably need a little bit more information before I could bring forward a meaningful item.
Don't you need consensus to agendize it though?
Yeah, so maybe.
I'm not really clear on what that is. I'll be honest with you,
we would
Madam
bring
Mayor.
Just to look at, they're just ways to revitalize the downtown, and one of the big issues is parking, and then we have no green space downtown, so it would just allow us to look at if we have funding that's sitting there that we could do something with, perhaps work on getting more parking downtown. There's vacant lots that are sitting there that we might be able to do something with to create more parking downtown, or to create a green space downtown. It's just to...
Okay, so a discussion on looking at perhaps some of the vacant lots in town to either do, to provide increased parking for the community or green space through.
Yeah, I just look at it and see. I know there's a lot of different funds. I know you've talked about park funds, and I just don't know what we have, you know, funding-wise that might be able to cover some of that. So I'm hoping you can bring some information about that as well.
Okay.
So.
Do I have a consensus on that? Looking at funding options for a Dunn Park master plan. We could bring something forward. The conducting a master plan is a pricey endeavor. So what we could do is look at gathering quotes and.
Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't clear on that. I was thinking of it as part of that overall bringing it back and discussing green spaces. Is that something that might be, talked about? And I wasn't trying to do it as a separate item, so.
She wants them lumped together, the downtown parking.
Yeah,
and
we could bring both.
Just bring it back and talk about it and what we'd want to see and deal with it from there.
And then bringing inclusionary housing back with at 15% with a 6-5-4 split and a listing of alternative compliance options as requested by Councilmember Burns at the last meeting.
I do have a question for the city attorney on that. The mayor stated that this is significant enough of a change to bring it back. Is that true?
I would say yes, just based on hearing the conversation when it was first last considered. Those were some of the kind of sticking points. So if those are changed, it would be something new for council to consider.
I'm all for it.
And that is the end of the items that I have to seek consensus for.
All right, so no, that's it for you, or did you have a report out?
Sure,
that you wanted to
I
do?
can give a report out. I had the good fortune of attending the League of California Cities City Managers Conference on the week of February, it was actually February 6th through 8th. And so that's a conference designed, it's more of a staff level conference. Typically what you see is city managers and assistant city managers, which is great because it's a smaller conference with smaller workshops. I was able to attend workshops around economic development, ballot measures that are coming forward, similar to Mr. Lamelli's presentation, as well as resident engagement strategies, as well as organizational culture and ethics courses. So I appreciate the opportunity to attend. And then I do know that our airport director recently attended a conference for airport operators, as well as Mr. Astorga attending a risk-based conference. At the same time, I was at the conference. So your staff is out at very valuable trainings, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Did you have any staff that were going to do report outs?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right, so unless there's anything further, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. Meeting's now adjourned.